Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a bit of a journey, a structured deep dive into the foundational DNA of digital media. Think of digital creation a lot like architecture. You can't build a stunning skyscraper without first understanding your steel, your glass, and your concrete. Well, in the digital world, our building blocks are colors, shapes, pixels, and timelines. By the time we wrap up today, you're going to see exactly how these fundamental pieces connect to create the stunning visual media we interact with every single day.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the foundations of graphic design, move on to editing raster images, then look at designing with vector graphics, and finally, we'll wrap up with the illusion of movement.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Foundations of Graphic Design.
So, at its core, graphic design isn't just about making things look pretty. It's really the purposeful arrangement of visual elements. We're talking text, images, colors, shapes, all designed specifically to solve a communication problem. Whether you're making a logo, a poster, or a whole website, the ultimate goal is to effectively communicate your ideas and instantly grab your audience's attention.
And when we talk about those visual elements, absolutely nothing is more fundamental than color. Traditional color theory tells us that our absolute most basic raw materials are the primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. Think of these as the foundational elements that literally cannot be created by mixing any other colors together. They are the starting point for everything else.
Now, when we start combining these primary building blocks, that's where we get our secondary colors. It's a simple, logical progression. You mix red and yellow, you get orange. Yellow and blue give you green, and blue and red create violet. Understanding this basic mixing process is really the very first key to mastering your digital canvas.
Okay, so once we actually have our colors, we can manipulate them to completely change the mood of a design. You basically do this by turning 3 dials. First, there's hue, which is just the actual name of the color, like red or blue. Then you've got saturation, which dictates how intense or pure that color is. A highly saturated color really pops, while a low saturation color looks washed out or grayish. And finally, brightness controls how light or dark the color appears. Tweaking these 3 properties is exactly how designers create perfectly balanced, attractive graphics.
You know, there is a massive difference between how colors are displayed on a screen versus how they're printed in real life. We have the RGB format, red, green, blue. That's an additive model used for screen media, like your phone or your computer monitor. But then there's CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. This is a subtractive model used strictly for physical print media, like magazines or posters. Knowing which format to use is honestly step 1 in any digital project. If you get it wrong, your printed poster might look totally different than it did on your monitor.
Moving right along to Section 2, Editing Raster Images. First up, let's define our terms. What are raster graphics? Well, they're images made up of thousands or even millions of tiny dots called pixels. They are essentially a giant digital mosaic. Because they're a fixed grid of dots, they're incredibly well suited for highly detailed things like photographs. But there is a pretty big catch. Because they are resolution dependent, if you try to enlarge a raster image too much, the quality drops drastically and it gets all blurry and pixelated. Common examples you've definitely used before are JPEGs and PNGs. When you're working with all these pixels and software like Photoshop, you're going to need some digital scissors to carve out specific areas for editing. Enter your selection tools. You've got the lasso tool for freehand selections, the polygonal lasso for straight lines, and the really incredible magnetic lasso that automatically snaps to the edges of an object for you. If you want to select things by color, the magic wand highlights areas of similar colors instantly. Or you can use the quick selection tool, which lets you literally just brush over an object to grab it.
So once you've made your selection with those digital scissors, how do you actually manipulate those pixels? It's a pretty straightforward 4-step process. First, you select the portion of the image you want. Second, you grab the Move tool. Third, you click and drag that selected area. And fourth, you simply drop it into its new, desired location. It's a very physical, tactile process of picking up a chunk of pixels and repositioning them to transform your canvas.
But what if you want to change the mood of those pixels without manually dragging them around? That is exactly where filters come in. Filters act like a magical fresh coat of paint. You can apply artistic filters to make a photo look like a hand-drawn sketch, or blur filters to soften backgrounds and create a sense of depth. There are distort filters to literally bend the image, and sharpen filters to increase edge clarity. With just a single click, you can completely transform the entire visual style of your raster layers.
That brings us to Section 3, Designing with Vector Graphics.
So, unlike those fragile pixel mosaics we just talked about, vector graphics are completely resolution-independent blueprints. Instead of dots, they are created using underlying mathematical paths, lines, curves, and shapes. Because it's all math under the hood, you could blow up a tiny vector image to the size of a city billboard, and the quality? Absolutely flawless. This makes vector files, like SVGs or Adobe Illustrator files, an absolute must-have for scalable logos and professional illustrations.
This really sets up the ultimate battle in digital design: fragile pixels versus infinitely scalable mathematical paths. Think about the contrast here. Raster is made of pixels and loses quality the moment you enlarge it, but it's perfect for complex photos. Vector is made of math and stays perfectly crisp no matter what, making it perfect for clean logos. Choosing the right foundation before you start essentially dictates the success of your entire project.
When you're actually creating these vector paths, you've got two main instruments at your disposal. The pencil tool is for freehand drawing. It gives you a bit less control, but it's fantastic for quick, organic sketches. On the flip side, the pen tool is the real heavy hitter of vector design. It allows for incredibly precise drawing by placing exact anchor points and manipulating mathematical curves. It is exactly what you need when your freehand mouse drawing just isn't cutting it. Whenever a designer needs a flawless, professional path, they're grabbing the pen tool for sure.
Okay, once you have your vector wireframes drawn out, you've got to breathe some life into them by playing with their properties. You can inject a fill color inside the object itself, you can adjust the stroke, which is just the width and style of the outline, and you can even create compound paths, which is this brilliant technique where you combine multiple paths to literally punch holes into objects, giving you the ability to create highly complex shapes.
So, here's a big question for you. We have our static raster pixels from Photoshop, and we have our perfectly scalable mathematical vector shapes from Illustrator. But in the realm of modern multimedia, static just isn't always enough. How do we take these precise building blocks and actually bring them to life?
Which leads perfectly into Section 4, the illusion of movement.
You know, animation is not a new digital invention. It actually stems from these beautifully simple historical optical devices that just tricked the human eye into seeing continuous motion. The thaumatrope was just a spinning disc with two images that visually blended together. The zoetrope was a rotating cylinder with a sequence of images inside. And of course, there's the classic flipbook, where you rapidly flip through pages of static drawings. These early tools proved something profound. Motion is, at its very core, just a trick of the eye.
This whole concept is perfectly encapsulated by stop-motion animation. It is a painstaking, very physical process. You place an object, take a photograph, move it just a tiny bit, take another photograph, and you repeat that process dozens or even hundreds of times. Then, you play those static images back rapidly. It brilliantly illustrates that all animation is fundamentally just a sequence of static images, just like our raster graphics being played back incredibly fast.
Today, of course, modern software like Adobe Animate digitizes that entire painstaking process. You've got the stage, which is your creative canvas. You have the Tools panel and Properties panel, which is where you draw and edit your vector shapes. But most importantly, you have the timeline, which controls all your frames and your timing. It's the ultimate setup. You place your perfectly designed vectors onto the stage, and then you use the timeline to dictate exactly when and how they move.
Wow, we've covered a whole lot of ground today. From the basic primary colors and fragile pixels of graphic design, to the absolute mathematical perfection of vector paths, all the way to creating the illusion of movement on a digital timeline, you now possess a really clear roadmap of the foundational building blocks of digital multimedia. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Knowing exactly how these raw materials work, what do you think the next evolution of multimedia will look like? And honestly, what are you going to build with it?